I'm Hans Engel from the Directors Guild of Canada. Welcome to our 24th episode of DGC Masterclass via Zoom. These are unprecedented times beyond anyone's imagining, which makes me even more grateful that you're joining us tonight. With these masterclasses, we're going behind the scenes and talking to some of the top creatives in the industry in Canada and internationally, covering directors, designers, picture and sound editors, with 2 episodes every week right now. You'll receive a new invitation with a specific link to tune in. I'm also posting the links on my Instagram. So far, we've had Emmy-winning director Jean-Marc Vallée, Emmy-winning editor Kelly Dixon, Oscar-winning designers David and Sandy Wasco, a special event with award-winning, groundbreaking filmmaker Jeff Barnaby, 2-time Oscar-nominated doc filmmaker Firas Fayyad, 2-time Oscar-winning sound editor Karen Baker-Landers, Oscar and Palme d'Or nominee Adam Agoyan, Oscar-nominated designers KK Barrett and Patrice Vermette, maverick filmmaker Bruce McDonald, Oscar-nominated director, writer, producer, and actor Sarah Polley, groundbreaking director Clement Virgo, history-making 2019 Academy Award-winning production designer Hannah Beekler, prolific director and actor Helen Shaver, Oscar-winning legendary Star Wars picture editor Paul Hirsch, award-winning groundbreaking director Mina Shum, renowned director, writer, and actor Casey Lemons, a special edition celebrating the release of Christian Sparks' sophomore film Hammer, world-renowned production designer Claude Paré, Emmy-nominated director, writer, and producer Veena Sood, Emmy-nominated BAFTA-winning director Kari Skoglund, Marvel Cinematic Universe picture editor Jeffrey Ford, and groundbreaking award-winning director Michelle Latimer. All those can be found on the DGC National and DGC Ontario YouTube channels. Tonight is our final regularly scheduled production designer masterclass as we look to putting the series on hiatus as of August 6th. Our moderator tonight is Arv Greywal, who's done a brilliant job throughout this series. Arv is a production designer who has been in the film industry for over 20 years. He's designed projects for renowned directors such as David Cronenberg, George Romero, Deepa Mehta, Richard Donner, and Mary Herron. He's worked on eclectic films such as the ever-fabulous Lars and the Real Girl, Jennifer's Body, Resident Evil Afterlife in 3D, No Escape, Brandon Cronenberg's Antiviral, and the war movie Hyena Road, directed by Paul Gross. He worked on Waco for the Paramount Channel, Genius Picasso for Fox Television and National Geographic, and Alias Grace for CBC Netflix. He's also designed pilot episodes of television series such as ABC's Lucky 7 and NBC's Timeless, among others. Arv has been nominated in the production designer category for 2 Genie Awards, 5 DGC Awards, and 2 Canadian Screen Awards. In 2003, he won a DGC Team Award for Cronenberg's film Spider. More recently, in 2018, he won a Canadian Screen Award for Achievement in Production Design for Sarah Polley's Alias Grace. Tonight's featured guest is production designer Wynn Thomas. He is the first African-American production designer in the history of film. I almost feel like I should say that again. It's absolutely amazing. As an assistant art director, he worked with the distinguished production designer Richard Sleebert on The Cotton Club. He also art directed or assisted on Beat Street, The Money Pit, Brighton Beach Memoirs, and The Package with Gene Hackman. As a production designer, Wynn has worked with some of the most important film directors of the late 20th century. For director Ron Howard and producer Brian Grazer, he designed A Beautiful Mind, which won the Academy Award for Best Picture, and the critically acclaimed Cinderella Man, shot in Toronto, both starring Russell Crowe. Wynn has a long-term relationship with Robert De Niro's Tribeca Productions. For many years, he was their in-house designer, having designed A Bronx Tale, directed by Robert De Niro, Wag the Dog, directed by Barry Levinson, starring De Niro and Dustin Hoffman, Analyze This and Analyze That, directed by Harold Ramis and starring De Niro and Billy Crystal. For director Tim Burton, he designed the cult classic Mars Attacks. He also designed the drag queen comedy Tu Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar, directed by Beeban Kidron, starring Wesley Snipes and Patrick Swayze. For actor-director Edward Norton, he designed Keeping the Faith. Other projects that Wynn designed include All Good Things with Ryan Gosling and Kirsten Dunst, an FBI thriller, Breach, directed by Billy Ray and starring Chris Cooper and Ryan Philippe. Wynn has a long-term collaborative relationship with Spike Lee. He's designed over 10 films with Spike, starting with She's Gotta Have It, School Days, Do the Right Thing, Mo Better Blues, Jungle Fever, the epic film Malcolm X, Crooklyn, He Got Game, Kings of Comedy, and the critically and commercially successful Inside Man. Wynn is the first African-American production designer to become a member of the Art Directors Guild in Los Angeles, and he's the first African-American nominated for the Art Directors Guild Award for his design work on Tim Burton's film Mars Attacks. He's thrilled to be a member of the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences. He just finished Alex Strangelove for Netflix, directed by Craig Johnson. He also designed the award-winning film Hidden Figures. Amazing. The film was nominated for 3 Oscars, including Best Picture. Wynn was awarded the Hollywood Film Award for Best Production Design in 2016, as well as the Art Directors Guild Award for Best Production Design Period Film. Wynn's most recent credits include Shaft, starring Samuel L. Jackson, directed by Tim Story, produced by Warner Brothers, the romantic drama based on the best-selling book The Sun Is Also a Star, directed by Rai Russo Young, and the most recent critically acclaimed drama for Spike Lee, you should watch it, Da 5 Bloods. It's absolutely incredible to have both Wynn and Arv here. Welcome, Arv Greywal and Wynn Thomas. Come on in.
Hi, everybody. Very happy to be here. So thank you for inviting me to this event, and thrilled to be here. So thank you.
An absolute honor. Now, before I turn it over to Wynn and Arv, I'd like to point out to our viewers the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. That's the way to send in questions to Arv so that he can watch for them and use them throughout the masterclass. He'll try to get to as many as he can, but he may not be able to get to all of them. That's it from me. Over to you, Arv and Wynn. I'll see you at the end. Really looking forward to this.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for being here, Wynn. You're a goddamn legend.
I don't know where to go after that. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, I got to say, before we start all this stuff, it's unbelievable when you do get to meet your heroes, and the conversations we've had thus far, endear you to me even more. And I want to start off this way, and we'll get to a couple of the things that Hans said. The first time I heard of Wynn Thomas was basically when I saw Do the Right Thing. And the only reason I heard of him was because I actually looked up who designed the movie. I wasn't in film at the time. I was studying architecture, had no intention of really getting into film at the time. And I just thought, this is an amazing piece of work. I've got to sort of figure out what this is about. And I knew about production designers before. Film's always been a passion. And I said, let me look this guy up. And I was amazed kind of at what you had done with that film. So first, that's one. Secondly, I just want to get this out because I think people need to know your character in a way. You're a very strong character and you won't put up with stuff, basically. And I know that because a very good friend of mine, Andrew Stern, was your art director on Cinderella Man. And yeah, I went over because I was busy on another show and I wanted to be really a part of Cinderella Man because I wanted to work with you, and went over to just see him and Jim Halpenny, who's building the show, and see how it's going. And they told me a story about you, basically who a location manager was set up a location for your guys to work in without heat, without light. And you very nicely questioned this location manager, like, will there be light and heat when the actors get there? And he said, of course, very much so. And he was like, why the hell isn't there light and heat when my guys get there? Because they're lesser than actors as human beings. And that story really sank into my heart because I won't give in to that sort of thing when I'm working on a show. So a mentor without even knowing it.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Thank you for that.
And so let's start with, I just want to correct one thing. It's Richard Silbert. I think Hans mispronounced that name. Let's start with the Cotton Club and sort of your origin story. That was the first gig you ever got. And it was an unpaid gig from what I have kind of.
Yes. Well, my background was in the theater and I had been working in the theater for a long time and loved working in the theater, but really got tired of being poor, which is a byproduct of working in the theater. So I had already passed the union exam in New York City. And as a result of being a union member, it allowed me to seek work in television as well as in film. So I began the process of interviewing with every New York production designer that I knew. And I kept running into closed doors. I mean, no one wanted to hire me because I had no experience in the film business. So it was a very frustrating time because I really interviewed with almost everyone in New York City. So anyway, Dick Silbert was in town working on a movie called The Cotton Club, which is a film that was being directed by Francis Ford Coppola. And it was a big deal that Dick had returned to New York because he hadn't worked there in many, many years. And he was his career had originally started on the East Coast. So my union had a meeting in which Dick Silbert came to talk to the union members. And it was a very interesting evening. There were about 60 people there. And it was really a chance for Dick to kind of come in and just talk about what he was doing, what his process is. And I was the sole Black person in the room, which is just a fact at that time. But that night, I did not introduce myself to him. I simply listened to all the stories that he was trying to tell. But meanwhile, I was pretty desperate about trying to get into the business. So the next day, I called the Cotton Club office, and someone picked up the phone. And I said, "Hi, my name is Wynn Thomas. Can I speak to Dick Silbert?" And it must have been a PA or somebody. And she said, "Well, do you know him?" And I said, "Well, yes, I know him." And my feeling was, I saw him the night before, so yes, I know him. Anyway, ironically, he got on the phone, and I said, "Mr. Silbert, my name is Wynn Thomas. I'm the Black guy that was in the room last night. Do you remember seeing me?" And he kind of chuckled and he laughed a little bit. And he said, "Yes, I remember seeing you." So I said, "Well, look, I'm a designer. My background's in the theater, and I'm trying to work my way into the film business. And I would love to, I would love to show you my work, come in and show you my work. And if you like my work, I'd love to volunteer for you." And he was a little hesitant about it, but he said, all right, come in. But I want you to know that the art department is completely booked. There's no positions available. But if you want to come in and show me your stuff, come in and show me your stuff. A few days later, I went in, I showed him my portfolio, and he repeated the same thing. He said, there's no jobs available. We're completely booked. But if you want to start and come in and do some research for me, come in next Monday. So that's what I did. I actually went home and I spoke to a friend of mine who was stage managing a Broadway show and said, "Look, I'm going to be volunteering for this guy. I'm not going to have any money coming in. I may need to borrow some money." And then at that point, I went in on that Monday, and it was kind of a wonderful day because they had already started building the Cotton Club set. And Dick came in, and when he came in, he took me around the set and he kind of essentially gave me a master class. So this was, it was a really wonderful opportunity to hear how this designer was thinking, because he was the best in the business at that time.
Absolutely. I mean, Dick Tracy, I think, was one of his films.
Dick Tracy, Chinatown, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, so many great movies.
Right.
So anyway, we went back to his office, and there were a stack of books there. And he said, "Well, I'm looking for this, I'm looking for that. Please try and find this stuff for me." So anyway, throughout the morning, because I was in his office, I was asked to leave the office because he had to have private conversations. So finally, the line producer or the production manager of the film came in. It was a gentleman named David Golden. And he said to Dick, he said, Francis Ford Coppola is in Japan. And when he gets back from Japan, he's going to need models of all the sets. So get somebody to make these models. So their conversation turned to the budget. I was asked to leave the office for the 4th time that day. And so you can imagine, so I went out and I sat on the Cotton Club set. You can imagine how I felt. I felt awkward. I felt in the way. I was embarrassed. All those things that you feel when you're in someone's space. So about 5 minutes later, Dick came out and he said, you built models, don't you? And I said, yes, I built models. So he says, let's hire you to make these models. So I had been there for about 4 hours, and I got the very last job in the art department on Cotton Club. And I was initially hired for 2 weeks, and that 2 weeks turned into 6 months. And it was an incredible experience because I was working directly with Dick for most of the job. And I would build these models, and I would take them down the hall to the office to Francis Ford Coppola, who would have a conversation with me. I mean, it was crazy. You know, Francis Ford Coppola talking to me. And then because in my theater background, I was a very good painter. So I ended up designing lots of murals for the film. And I ended up working directly for Dick. And it was a wonderful, and the other thing that really made it wonderful, they were building all these wonderful sets down on the stage. And I would frequently go off on what the joke became, oh, Wynn's off on a field trip. And the thing that was wonderful about that is that Dick never stopped me from doing that. He never said, where's Wynn? Because when someone said, oh, he's off on a field trip, he understood exactly what I was doing, that I was going around looking at everything and taking it all in. And at the end of the job, I used to do this so much, they gave me a trophy that said world's greatest field trip taker. That's how often I was away from my desk. But it was a great job, and it was a great 6 months. And literally, you know, the great thing about working for him was that the walls essentially came down for me after that. And whenever I was applying for a job, Dick would pick up the phone and call that production designer and tell them to hire me. So.
Now, we must point out the irony for people who don't know the Cotton Club. It's a jazz club in Harlem, a very famous one. And you might have been the only Black guy behind the camera.
Yes, well, you know, the movie was an amazing film with an amazing cast with Richard Gere and Diane Lane. But also, it had almost every Broadway dancer was in that cast. It was just amazing. And literally, you would go downstairs and you would be returning back to the 1930s, 1940s. It was a fantastic, fantastic first movie.
When you did Mo Better Blues, was that something you drew from?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because, you know, I was so inspired by that film, and I had designed so many murals for those clubs, all the various clubs, so that when I sat down to do, you know, Mo Better Blues was originally written, you know, Mo Better Blues is a Spike Lee movie, was the first one with Denzel Washington, and it takes place in a jazz club. And the way the script was written, it was written to take place in, you know, jazz clubs are generally holes in the wall. They're very black, they're very dark walls, usually black walls, ironically. And I decided to reconceive that movie. And because when I read the script, it felt like a 1950s movie musical to me. Right. And so that is, you know, that was what I said to Spike. I says, I want to design this like it's a 1950s movie musical, which therefore allowed me to be much more expansive with the nightclub itself. But also, if you look at that film, that conceptual approach had an impact on everybody's decisions. If you look at that film, all the costumes are right out of the 1950s, right out of the 1960s. So the film has this period feeling to it, but is at the same time, it's timeless.
And Ernest Dickerson was the DP on it, I suspect.
That's correct.
So in terms of getting this leeway to inject so much color into that movie, basically, because it could have been done. It could have been a movie where it was done in a very realistic way, let's say, where all the walls were black and the clothes were sort of, because these guys were poor, these jazz artists. So how did that impact your decision to inject the color in it, which I think you carried through in Malcolm X in a certain way? I find a lot of similarities in the colors in those two movies. How did that impact your director of photography? What was his take on it?
Well, you know, when the movie came out, it was such an interesting thing because the critics were saying Ernest Dickerson is responsible for bringing Technicolor back to movies. Okay. So, very often the director of photography will get credit for the work that we do, because had I made those clubs, dark clubs with low ceilings, he wouldn't have been able to do what he did. And if you look at that film, again, it's treated like a movie musical. And because of the concept, the club became a 2-story nightclub. The camera, I knew that those Spike and Ernest liked to move the camera. I knew that about them. So it gave them the freedom to move the camera in a way that they would not have been done if the movie had been approached from a more realistic point of view. So it actually freed them up to have a lot more fun and to be a little bit more joyful in interpreting the material and in interpreting the environment.
Right.
So,
and we'll come back to more of your movies, but I want to go back to the beginning again, the passion with which you kind of speak of in terms of getting your first job, doing it for free for at least a few hours, or thinking you were going to do it for free for however long. I mean, it's more of a calling than it is a job at a certain point. And my question really comes from a lot of young people watching now. It's so busy at this time that we're just basically pulling people from everywhere into our industry to kind of get the workforce that we need to put out all this product that the streamers require. Let's say that. I want you to sort of differentiate between a calling and a job, basically. Tell me how you feel about it. How do you feel about young people coming to the industry right now who may not have a background in that deep or a passion for film per se, but they've got the skills to do the job that's sort of required of them? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, I think our job, if you're wanting to work in the art department, it is a skill job. So it would be best to equip yourself with some fundamental skills. I think it's important to be able to draw. I think it's important to be able to paint. I think one has to have a sense of architectural drafting, or, because although people are now doing things on computers, I still think it's important to be able to draft by hand as well as to be able to have an understanding of the computer programs right now. I believe that you have to have some skill set, because you're not going to, even if you're coming in as a production assistant, you're not going to be able to advance without having some fundamental skills. So my suggestion to everyone who is trying to come in to the art department, that you at least have basic drawing skills, basic drafting skills, or an understanding about that. Now for me, all of that stuff was part of me just being an artist. And I had gone to theater school and studied set design. So I had learned those skills when I was in theater school in college. And I had refined all of those skills during my theater years. So by the time I got into the art department at the Cotton Club, I had already had 10 years of experience designing. And this is the point of all this is that my trajectory, I didn't spend a lot of years as an art director. I spent only like 2 or 3 years assisting other people, because I knew that I wanted to be a production designer. And all of my theatrical experience became part of my background, so that when I started to seek out production designers' work, I had already had 10 years of experience designing theatrical productions. So I already knew how to design. What I did during those 3 years was to develop a sense of the vocabulary that was necessary to be a production designer.
I think that's a really great word to use, because I think you have to have a vocabulary in film.
That's
you
correct.
have it within your lexicon. If you're going to be talking to production designers, if you're going to be talking to directors of photography, as sort of the new recruits to the film business kind of get further up the chain, start to art direct and start to production design, they really have to know sort of what people are talking about. I've sat in survey buses with directors who may not have a deep background in film. They came out of commercials, or they came out of, I think the theater directors obviously do, but you sometimes sit there dumbfounded that this person doesn't know such and such a movie, or this person doesn't know such and such a movie. So I'm going to ask you, what was the sort of foundational movie that motivated you in a way to say, maybe this is the thing I could do?
Well, that means I have to go back to my teenage years. Look, for me, I grew up in a single parent, 6 kids, welfare family. So terrible neighborhood, really difficult beginnings. And that's just, okay, that's the start. But what happened was, on television one night, I saw a movie called Summer and Smoke, which is based on a Tennessee Williams play. And that movie changed my life. And I don't know what it is about that. It was something about that story that really spoke to me. And I was devastated by it. And at that point, I went to my local library, and I must have been 14 years old at this point. I went to my local library and I took out every Tennessee Williams play, and I decided that I wanted to have a life in the theater. And it was life-changing in the sense that it got me, what happened was I decided I wanted to be an actor for some reason, and it sort of began to get me out of my neighborhood. So what happened was, very briefly, I'll give you a brief version of the story, is that I actually started working at with a theater company in Philadelphia at the age of 15. And I spent my entire teenage life working at this theater company. And the way I got there is that I knew I wanted to audition, but I was too young to audition. I persuaded my 18-year-old sister to audition for this company. She got in, and she did a couple of shows there. And as soon as she started working there, I started hanging out. And I spent my entire teenage life there. So I was hanging lights, acting in shows. I became like one of the kids of the theater owners. And I did everything. So literally every day after high school, I would go to this theater. And this theater company was doing Gunter Grass and Durimont, and they were doing Chekhov. They weren't doing Hello Dolly. So it was a very interesting years as a teenager. From 15 to 18, I spent my entire life there. So that's where my passion began. So my first movie that I loved was Summer and Smoke. But I was a real theater geek, and my passion was primarily theater. I loved movies, but I was much more of a theater geek. And it was only when what was also happening in my theater career was that I was, again, as a young Black set designer, I wasn't getting Shakespeare jobs. I wasn't doing Moliere. And that was the stuff that I wanted to do. And I was running into a bit of a ceiling there. And I was very frustrated with that. And because of that frustration, and because of the economics of working in the theater, it was then that I said, well, I love movies. So I'm going to decide to work in the film business.
And one of the things, well, I'm just going to jump around a little bit.
That's right.
Your career is now spanned, I guess, if you started with Cotton Club, early 80s, so
35 years, yeah.
35 years, okay, terrible at math. 35 years. And in terms of, so just now, looking back, sort of there's a longevity there. So the question really becomes, and you're not, to me, I don't think that you're the type of person who's only working because you get on that hamster wheel and you just keep getting one job after the other. I think you're driving yourself towards a career of sorts, just looking at the immense amount of body of your work. So what do you attribute this longevity to? And what is the spark that kind of keeps you going within it?
Well, I'm still passionate about storytelling. I mean, ultimately in the end, I got here because I'm a storyteller. I used to love, again, as a young person, in my sort of gang-ridden neighborhood, I would sit out on my front stoop and I would read books. And those books would take me to other worlds. And, the gang guys weren't interested in me because, in their eyes, I was a sissy because I'm reading books on my front stoop. And so the thing that has attracted me to theater as well as to film is the fact that I get to tell these great stories. And that's what I'm still passionate about. I mean, I love telling stories. And if you look at the body of my work, there's a lot of interesting stories there. And that's what still drives the machine. You're right. I don't work just to work. I work because I'm interested in the story that's being told, or the job that I am. That's what runs the machine. And and the thing for me from a racial point of view, if you, I've been very careful about the kinds of films that I do about Black folks. I mean, I didn't want to show us using drugs or being violent towards each other. I wanted to show Black people, Black and brown folks doing things that they haven't done before, and showing us in a very positive light. So once I got control of the choices that I could make in my career, those are the kinds of films that I worked on primarily. And so if you look at the body of work, that's what you see. There's no, so there's I did Shaft recently, and I really had to question myself when I did Shaft, because there's there's Latino drug dealers in Shaft, and there's like Black folks are just shooting each other. But I said, all right, it's all right at this point in your career to do something that I went around apologizing to all my Latin friends. I'm saying, oh, well, there's Latino drug dealers in this, and I'm sorry. But
you've got to kind of do a guilty pleasure, let's say.
That's exactly right. And I had a great time working on that movie, and I wanted to work with that director. But I think the point that I'm trying to make, what drives my choices and what drives my machine, is the fact that I'm trying to work on interesting stories.
Okay, and now I'm going to ask a question that a few people emailed me about, and I'm sure you're sick of this, but they're like, can you ask him about the first time he met Spike Lee?
Okay, so no, I'd be happy to answer that question. I was art directing a movie called Beat Street, which was an early breakdancing film, which, so anyway. And the movie was being designed by Patricia von Brandenstein, who is one of the first women production designers.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's a whole nother, yeah. So, and she, so she was designing the film. She had just finished doing Amadeus in the Czech Republic and was coming back to do this breakdancing film. So she hired me as her art director. And there was a young Black, the director was looking for an assistant, the coffee fetching person for him. And there was this kid from NYU, had a very good reputation at NYU, who came in to interview for that job. And that person was Spike Lee. And Spike came into the art department because our PA in that department, our PA in our department, had gone to graduate school with him at NYU. So he came in to see her. And when he walked in, I'll never forget it, he looked at me and he said, gee, I didn't know there were any Black people doing this job. And I said, well, yeah, well, I'm trying to do it. I am doing it. And it was a very fortuitous meeting, because that's how we met. And essentially, by the way, Spike did not get the job. He didn't get hired. But he was wise enough. Spike was very wise during that time period. He stayed in touch with me. And what I remember about him from that time, I think he was actually cleaning film in a distribution house. Now, I didn't even know what that means. I didn't even know there was such a job, but that's what he was doing. But meanwhile, what he was doing was that he was putting a family of young people together, actors and other technicians, and he was beginning to put a group of people together. And at that point, we were, Sam Jackson was part of that group. There were he would go to the theater and he would meet theater actors, and they became part of that group. And we would, on occasion, get together just socially. So finally, he had a project that he wanted to do, and it was a movie called Messenger. And it was sort of a biographical film, and it's a story about a bicycle messenger, and it's his family. The mother dies. A year later, the father comes home and gets engaged to a white woman. And this was kind of the story of Spike's family. And it was a very interesting film. It was a lot of people, a lot of actors. And the person who was producing the movie was an actual guy who owned a bicycle messenger shop. Okay. So he brought all these people together. Spike brought all these people together that he had been, keeping in contact for the last year or so. And we had 2 weeks prep time and nobody was being paid anything. And so it was locations. We had found that we started finding the locations. We were doing the work. And the Friday before the Monday that we were supposed to start shooting, this guy, this bicycle messenger owner, pulled out all his money and the movie collapsed. And Spike, it was devastating for all of us, but particularly for Spike. I mean, he was devastated. And I tell this story because I think it was at that moment that Spike decided that he was going to produce his own movies from now on. Anyway, what happened was it was impossible. He spent the next 6 months or 8 months trying to raise money to complete Messengers, and he couldn't do it because the cast was very large. It was a lot of locations. And then about a year later, he came back and he said, well, look, I have this smaller film. It's a smaller cast, smaller group of actors, not as many locations. And I'm going to borrow the money from my grandmother, and I'd like you to come work on this movie. And that movie was She's Gotta Have It. Okay. So Spike had borrowed $21,000 from his grandmother. And we shot that movie in 12 days. Everybody worked for free. And that was the movie that launched his career.
Amazing. It's amazing. So, and then after She's Gotta Have It, I think, was there another movie between that and?
Yes. Yes. So what happened when She's Gotta Have It was that he showed a rough cut to a couple of people. There was a little bit more money put into the film, and the movie went to Cannes Film Festival. And I think what people don't realize is we are very familiar with independent films today. Everybody knows what an independent movie, but She's Gotta Have It was the beginning of that time period of independent movies. And the movie went to the Cannes film. It did very, very well there. And as a result of that, the publicity that came from that movie, he ended up getting financing for a film called School Days, which was a movie musical about Spike's college days at Morehouse. And that's the next film that we did.
Cool. So let's move on a little bit to Do the Right Thing, because I want to relate, because that was really the movie that put you guys on the map.
That's right.
And so and now you've worked with Spike on, I think probably about 10, 11, 12 movies,
Yes.
all the way to The Five Bloods, which I saw last week, loved it. And I just want to kind of get a little bit of a sense as to, with a new director, Spike, even after 2 or 3 movies, he was still a brand new director in a way.
Right.
And you being a fairly new director, having worked with legendary designers still, what was your approach when you guys were putting together? Because the Do the Right Thing had such a pointed design point of view, such a direction that it took. There was such a massive thrust to it. What was the discussion that led you to that? Because you obviously didn't have a lot of money.
Right. Well, my relationship with Spike has been a very special relationship. And I also have to say this, by the time when I started working with him, I was one of the few people that actually had experience. I mean, he had put a whole team of people together who were not practiced filmmakers. I mean, Ernest hadn't shot that much. I mean, so, but he had put this family of people together. And one of the great things about Spike is, especially during those early days, is that he was writing all the material. And he really gave me a great deal of freedom to interpret that material. So my process with him, which is still pretty much what it is today, is that I will read the script, I will have a meeting with him, and I will talk to him about what's important for him in the script. And then I will formulate a visual concept for the movie. I will put together a concept, an approach to designing the film. I will share that concept with him. And then once he approved that conceptual approach, that I would actually write it up as pieces of paper. And then that concept, that visual concept would be shared with the entire company. And therefore everybody would be working within the conceptual framework, i.e. Mo Better Blues, 1950s movie musical. Therefore costume designers look like 1950s clothes. Everybody worked within that framework. So he gave me a great deal of freedom to interpret his material, because Spike's heart and soul and passions were put into the screenplay. And that's what we do as a production designers. We are taking the writer's words and turning them into concrete images and interpreting those words. That's what we do as a production designer. So Spike gave me a great deal of freedom. So he wasn't very possessive about, these are my ideas. He let me bring my ideas to the table.
Right.
Sorry,
please go ahead.
Yeah. So when we got to Do the Right Thing, this was our third picture together. And, there's something, there's the film, the sort of conceptual, obviously we needed to find a block in that we had to be able to control. But also, I wanted to treat it like a desert. I wanted very few trees on it. But, sometimes in a desert, there's bits and pieces of color. The other thing about that script is that it's very much like a theater. It's like a play in many ways. It's very, very theatrical, which therefore allowed me to use color in a very broad way. And the other requirement that we needed was that in Bed-Stuy, there are no Korean markets. There are bodegas, but there are no Korean markets. And at the same time, we knew that so I needed an empty lot to build the Korean market. And I also knew that I needed another empty lot to build Sal's Pizzeria. So all of these factors were part of the equation of what I was looking for in order to help tell that story.
And I have to say, that's a complex kind of set of parameters to put together. But there were some very simple moves that you made. And one of the ones that I always think on and say that helped the movie so much was something as simple as a red painted wall that the three guys are sitting in front of, who are kind of our Greek chorus in a way.
That's exactly right.
They're sweating and they're talking out loud, and it was magnificent that you decided to paint that wall red.
Yeah.
And I think that when you don't have money, at least you've got color, and you can make it with that.
That's exactly, and what you just said is absolutely correct. And again, it's a theatrical motif. They are the Greek chorus. So again, that movie gave me a bit of freedom to make those kinds of bold choices. I mean, literally what happened there, Spike and I think we were walking around the set that day, and we looked at the wall, and the wall was, I don't know what color it was. And I said, well, and he said, well, okay, we'll put the guys over here. And I said, well, I'm just thinking about painting that wall. And he said, well, what do you want to paint? I said, I want to paint it bright red. And he said, okay. And that was that simple.
Right.
So.
Amazing. So do you carve out that level of freedom when you're not working with Spike Lee, or how do you kind of manage with different directors, basically?
Well, each director is a different animal, a different beast. And so, it is our job as a production designer to figure out who the director is, who he or she is, and to figure out what it is that they want or how they're going to communicate. That's our job. So everybody is very, very different. When I worked with Robert De Niro on A Bronx Tale, Bob is coming from a very realistic place. As an actor, that's what he does. He starts with reality. So what you can't do when you're having conversations with him is talk about things in a big conceptual way, because that's not his process. You have to start from a very realistic point of view. What's real, okay? The interesting thing is that on A Bronx Tale, not only was I getting De Niro's input about what was real, but I also had to talk to Taz Palminteri's family. And then there were a whole series of Italian mobsters on that movie who also had an opinion. So, I mean, I got to, the thing that was great about that film is that I got to go into social clubs that were run by I got to go into Gotti's social club because I needed to do some research. So when you're working with someone like De Niro, your jumping off point is a reality, what's real. And then, each director is very, very different. When I work with Tim Burton on Mars Attacks, Tim Burton's movies always have a very, very specific look that we associate with Tim Burton. And I thought that he was going to be much more present in the beginning in terms of developing ideas, but he wasn't. And a very interesting thing happens. Tim is an artist, and therefore he respects other artists. So he wants you as an artist to go ahead and develop your ideas and your concepts. And then you present those ideas to him, and then he comes in and he makes a suggestion that turns it into a Tim Burton choice. So so each director is very, very different.
Yeah. Amazing and interesting. Well, I'm going to jump again around a little bit.
That's right.
In terms of, because I want to get back to the research that you talked about with Chaz Palminteri, because he wrote that script, by the way, for
the stage. Yeah.
The idea of kind of a little bit of hyperbole, a little garnishing of extra on top to kind of enhance the scene. Does that ever come into play, or is that not something that you even subscribe to in a certain way? Meaning, let's say there's a heightened emotion in the scene, and you're doing it in, whatever the scene is, let's say it's in a kitchen. Would you kind of put in specific stuff that sort of relates to that kind of emotion that's going on in the scene?
Absolutely. And in fact, what you're talking about is fundamental in terms of my own process. Because early on, when we're working with the director, like I said, we're going to have this meeting with the director, right? Have a meeting with the director, find out what's important to the director. And then what I do is I surround myself with research. Now, research is going to do one or two things. It's either going to confirm what you have in your head, or you're going to be inspired by it, right? And so there's the research element. But the thing that becomes ultimately most important for me in terms of my early part of the process is a series of questions. How do I feel about the material? What do I want the audience to feel? And what do I want the actors to feel? So those questions, so it's the whole emotional journey. What's the emotional journey that I want to take the audience on? That's what's running the choices that I'm making. Right. Because anybody can duplicate reality. But what we're doing as designers is that we're taking the audience on a very specific journey. And we want them to experience not only the mechanics of the plot, but we also want them to feel something as they're on that journey. So we do that with color, line, and texture, right? Color, obviously it's obvious what color does. Color will signal to us what we're supposed to feel, i.e. the red wall or something. Texture is brick, something soft is going to have, fabric is going to have a very different feeling than a brick wall or a stone wall. So we're using texture to also tell the audience what we want them to feel. And when I talk about line, I'm talking about shape and the size of a room, or a long rectangular room is going to have a very particular kind of feeling. A room with a low ceiling is going to have a particular kind of feeling. So the tools that we have as a designer, we're using all of those tools to guide the audience on its emotional journey. That's what we're doing. Nice.
Let's go back to research for a second, because I'm getting a couple of questions about that. Your projects, they depend on research in a certain way. Hidden Figures, for example, same with The Five Bloods. I'm sure there was a lot of research, Mo Better Blues. My question really is, and we can get back to those movies, especially Hidden Figures, but my question is, how do you research a movie like Mars Attacks? What was your thinking in terms of, how am I going to get into this movie?
Mars Attacks was based on a series of trading cards that came out, I think, in the 60s.
Mhm.
And when you looked at those cards, the color was very extreme, too extreme to be put into a movie,
Right.
okay? But one of the things that we were doing in Mars Attacks is that we were paying homage to a series of 1950s sci-fi films. And when the thing that was clear to me from a design point of view is that when you look at those movies from that time period, it was very big, bold scenery with little small elements in it. So my approach to that film, to Mars Attacks, was to develop design sets that were very big and very graphic with smaller details in the frame. So to really kind of simplify, you were essentially stripping a set down to the essential elements that you needed to tell the story. And we tried to do that in even some of the more contemporary environments in addition to the spaceship.
Right. And I mean, one of the best examples of that is the what would you call it? The den or the room that Jack Nicholson's character occupied. That
That's
was
correct.
a fantastic set. It's one of the most fun sets ever filmed, basically.
Yeah. And
What was your sort of inspiration for that? Was it back to the cards and?
well, again, what happens for me is that I put a research folder together for every single set.
Mhm.
And I'm not, again, I use research to be inspired, to find ideas. So sometimes I'll see something in research that will inspire an idea. So it's not, so again, I think research does two things. It either confirms what you have in your head or it inspires you.
Right.
So I don't know, now I don't remember what the link was to his stuff, but I'm sure I was just inspired. Also that set that he's in, we actually in the film, the spaceship comes and it destroys the building that he's in. And that was a real building in Las Vegas. So it was a circular building. So that I know that his space was based on a part of it was a circle. Yeah. So, but again, there's a whole bunch of there's a lot of circular motifs in Mars Attacks.
Right. So now I want to jump to Beautiful Mind for a second, and still keeping in mind idea of research, still keeping in mind sort of the idea of the emotion that you're projecting within the production design that sort of speaks of the character. Of something that's now become part of the visual lexicon in film is the Beautiful Mind wall. I basically had so many people just last year, the showrunner on the show I was working on is like, well, this should be like the Beautiful Mind wall. Is that something that you're aware of?
Yeah, well, I all the thing I know is that I've seen lots of walls like it since I did it. And that, that was a very interesting journey to getting that wall. I mean, it was a big point of discussion with Ron and Akiva Goldsman. I had assigned, not a set decorator, ironically, to do that, but I used painters,
right.
My art department, my painters, to kind of put that together, essentially to define Nash's insanity, because that's what it is. Mm-hmm. And we went through a few versions of it. And then once we got it was very easy to duplicate. But I had the same people, it was like 2 or 3 scenic artists who put all those elements together. Right. Because it is a big moment when you see it, and it does say a great deal about where he is emotionally and mentally.
Sure. And then can we sort of understand from your point of view where you draw the line? Like there is a point where it could have gone too far, or there was a point where it didn't go far enough, and I'm sure you directed your painters to kind of add more to the wall or something. Can you just talk about that fine line where you have to decide that this is ready now, this is done?
It's all instinctual. Mm-hmm. It's not logical. It's right. Not practical. Yes. And I'm not afraid of just trusting my gut and trusting how I feel about something emotionally, because that's what makes us artists. right?
Absolutely.
So it's really, really all that. Now, Beautiful Mind is a very interesting movie because, again, there was a conceptual framework for that. Ron was receptive to that kind of talk. And if I remember it correctly, it was kind of like the first third of the film was kind of like a Life magazine from the 1950s, a very straightforward sort of world. But as we head into the second act, where Nash's mind is beginning to, the audience is not always aware of that, but he's beginning, the schizophrenia is beginning to, his mind is beginning to collapse. If you look at the movie very carefully, instead of the walls being rectangular or square or boxy, they become circular walls, and the elements in the sets become more fragmented, because that's what's happening to his mind. So as you travel throughout some of the sets, not all of them, that's what you'll see. There's a moment where he meets Ed Harris's character in a space, and if you look very carefully at the map that's on the wall behind him, it's all distorted. And when he gets into the insane asylum, it's not square rooms. It's all circular, and it's all bits and pieces of things, because we don't know where we are, nor does Nash. So again, it was making deliberate, subtle design choices that the audience is seeing, but they're not always aware of what they're seeing.
Right.
So it's having an impact on the audience. That's what we do. It's having an impact on the audience, and it's not screaming at them and shouting it, but it's still there. It's informing them about what they're seeing.
Right. So that's the second circular room you've talked about tonight. Let's go to the third circular room, which is in Hidden Figures.
Yes.
Basically, you had access to some NASA files, from what I've read, and you had access to the studio's library, which had a lot of documentation.
Right.
At what point did you decide that the room that these characters are going to live in, or the crux of the story is going to take place in, is a circular room with a raised kind of a podium where Kevin Costner's character is in?
Right. Well, again, you're seeing there's a consistency here. I'm going to put the work, I'm going to design the film with some sort of conceptual framework here. But it's very simple. This is a movie about, first of all, NASA itself was not very interesting. If you look back at that research, it was really cinder block rooms. They weren't very interesting. Hidden Figures is an upstairs, from a conceptual point of view, it's an upstairs, downstairs story, right? The Black women, the computers are in the basement. They're in concrete bunkers, okay? So part of the thing that I'm doing as a designer is taking the audience on the same journey that Katherine Johnson is going on. So I couldn't, that room in reality, the Space Task Force room in reality would have been another square rectangular cinder block room. But that's not very interesting.
Right.
So what happened was we were scouting, I was taking the director around to see some location. I had been scouting earlier, and we have been trying to figure out where we're going to do NASA's campus. And one of the things that happened for me is when I was on Morehouse's campus, we walked into a building that was a circular building. And when I saw that, that's where the idea came from. Oh, because also Hidden Figures is about orbiting. It's about everybody's going around circles. Everyone's going around. So again, from a conceptual point of view, the astronauts are going on a journey. Katherine Johnson is going on a journey as well. So it's just, again, she's in her own new orbit. What it did is that it freed me up by making it room circular to make it much more interesting, because the audience, when she goes into that room for the first time, I want the audience to feel what she's feeling and going, wow, what a neat space. That's what the audience wants. You want the audience to feel that.
Right. Amazing. And so let's get to the sort of nuts and bolts. And you can use any film that you like, and we can stick with Hidden Figures. In terms of the nuts and bolts of basically drawing up the set, or you've now in your mind conceptualized this as a circular space. What happens next? Do you do the drawings or at least a floor plan or a sketch of some sort before you hand it off?
That is correct. I will do in that particular set. I was working with a set designer on that film, a young man who I had been working with for many years and who's now going on having his own career. So what I did was I did a series of sketches on smaller pieces of paper, and they're very rough sketches. And I had an approximate sense of size, what we had in terms of the details of the room. We had, for the details of the room, like the big blackboard and all that stuff, we had research for that. But I still had to come back in, and we didn't put that set on a sound stage. We had taken over a high school across the street from where our offices were. And because of budgetary constraints, I had to put the set into an empty gym. Okay. So, but at the same time, I knew I wanted it to be circular. So it was just a matter of working out the size of it. I knew I wanted Kevin Costner's office to repeat that pattern. So I gave Danny essentially a series of rough sketches. And then what happens is that he begins to work it up, and it becomes an intense collaboration between this young artist and myself. And the thing is, the idea is coming from me, but the way I use people in my office is that they're collaborating with me. I want them to bring ideas to the table because it makes the job fun for them. So then the whole thing is developed in stages, because meanwhile I'm out scouting locations, I'm designing other sets. So Danny really kind of worked the whole thing up, and then we tweak it, we refine it, and it's a whole wonderful design process. It's the joy of designing, really.
Absolutely. Let me ask you a quick aside. Is there ever a point when you've read a script, you've kind of gone to some locations and there's a particular sense like, I don't have any idea what to do with this thing? Does that ever happen to you? Or conversely, if you do have an idea, the director says, no, this isn't what I want, but I don't know what I want. Has that ever happened to you? I'm hesitating because that hasn't happened too much.
I do ultimately think it's our job to solve the problem. I think the mythology in the business is that the director knows everything. Most of the time on the jobs that I've been in, the directors don't know too much. That's the reason they hire us, is to guide them to solutions and decisions. That's been my experience. So that's what I'm bringing. I don't need it. I need a director to tell me what's important to him or her. Then I'm going to figure it out. That's my job. My job is to figure it out. Now there's times when, what happens is I now trust my brain. I trust my instrument. Sometimes in the very beginning of my career, I felt I had to solve everything immediately. But nowadays I trust my instrument. So I know even if there's not something there immediately, I know that I'm going to solve it because I'm thinking it's baking. The idea is baking. And sometimes it's not immediately apparent. And I have to let my machine, which is my body and my brain and my heart, my soul, figure it out. But I will.
Amazing. And this brings me to, I'm just going to jump a little bit. What I've found in my art departments lately is that a lot of the young people coming in have a level of stress and a level of anxiety that I didn't really think we felt in the last, let's say, 15 years, 20 years or so. It's kind of become exponentially a greater thing in the last 4 or 5 years, I'd say. Is that something that you find? And do you find it within yourself, possibly even?
What level of stress you're talking about?
Yes, a level of stress, a level of anxiety. And what do you do to mitigate that sort of thing?
I don't have that anymore. I'm, because I've been doing it so long. And again, as I'm saying, I trust my instrument. Look, here's the thing. The thing about art, the thing about who we are, and the thing about being an artist, which is what we are, is that you have to fill the machine. You have to fill your body with stuff, which means that you have to read, you have to see other movies, you have to fill yourself with other art, you have to go to museum, and you have to feed yourself, because that is what you're going to pull on as an artist. What you're talking about is the result of people using the machine.
Possibly, yes, probably.
That's what the problem is, because that machine is killing people's imagination and is not filling the soul. Because you fill the soul by reading books, by going to museums, by looking at art books. You don't fill it up by looking at your machine. So you have to, again, so when, on a personal level, I don't know how you do this job if you don't read books, because that's what we do. We get the writer's words and we have to imagine that world. And if you don't have that as a part of your vocabulary, I don't know how you do it.
I agree. I often told people working with me, basically, don't research this on the internet. Maybe go to a library and find me a couple of books on it, because I'm a firm believer in the idea of picking up a book off the shelf accidentally and saying, hey, this might be cool. And I've also told them, don't be afraid to spend a couple of $100s on a book if you find one image that works in it.
Yes. I think you're absolutely right. And here's my pattern. You're absolutely right. As you can see, there's a lot of books behind me, all right? But there's at the New York Public Library here, there's something called the Research Collection, tens of thousands of photographs. And what I do when I start a job is that I will go and I will just look through stuff, because again, the research is, and I discover stuff there all the time by accident. So I turn to the internet last. That's the last place I look. Yeah. Because again, I don't get it. It doesn't work for me. But and then I go to Strand Bookstore, which is the big bookstore here, and I buy books. The internet is the last place that I look.
I would completely agree, and I'm getting some online agreement with that as well. One of the things that I love about seeing of your work is your hand drawings, your drafted drawings. And you even did the old architectural trick of putting them through the blueprint machine and getting a view on them. Is that something you miss? Because obviously that takes time. And some of these movies that you're doing now, you don't get a lot of time to do that sort of thing.
Well, look, I feel grateful that I had a period in my career where I could actually do all that stuff. I feel very grateful that I had that time, and it certainly has informed my art. Nowadays, again, what I try and do is put together a team of people who are artists, and I'm less possessive about the material now. And I'm more willing to share that. It's a collaborative process for me. So the development of those ideas are not only just, as I said before, are not just coming from me, they're coming from the people that I'm working with. And therefore, my team is my collaborators. So I'm a little easier about that. I don't feel the need to control every detail anymore.
We're going to just stick with a little bit of historical research and period correct dramas and that sort of thing. So going to Cinderella Man for something. There's a building here in Toronto, which is the building of the Historical Society. It's on 10 Adelaide Street. And it has an upstairs room that's often used for film, and you used it in that Cinderella. I don't know if you recall, but you used it in Cinderella.
Twice.
Okay, twice. One of them was Johnston's office. It was kind of the big carved piece behind him, a couple of columns.
That's right.
Initially walk into that room, it's just a bare room with white walls, woodwork, and a big ugly carpet. Tell us about your process from looking at that room to sort of the finished product of where you took it, essentially, because that's one of the most magnificent sort of transformations that room has gotten that I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot of that room in movies we do in Toronto.
Yes, I know. That room is used quite a bit. So again, I guess there must have been, I was very, the thing is, as you know, we used a department store in downtown Toronto for the exterior for Madison Square Garden. And there's those lovely arched windows.
Yes.
So when Braddock is returning to that space twice, he's going to the boxing commissioner's office. And then there's another scene, or earlier scene, in which he's going to a club in which all the boxing guys are hanging out. Both those places are supposed to be in the Madison Square Garden building.
Right.
Okay? That's just the technical aspect of it. But I love the architectural. Again, what happens for us is, I walked into that room and I go, and also, so what happened was for me, I remember specifically the architecture in the office, the wooden office. I was in New York and I kept seeing all these lovely exterior columns. And that's what inspired me. It was just these sort of Art Deco shapes. So I said, all right, I'll put this wooden office in there first, and then we'll pull everything out. And then I'll put a big bar in there. And so we came back in and wallpapered and all this sort of stuff. So I got to use it twice. And the bones of it were really just inspired me. That's really what happened.
That's fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about Five Bloods. You have, traveled to Toronto. You work in various cities. You've worked in other countries. The Five Bloods was in Vietnam and Thailand. What is your take? And do you take people with you? Well, this is not the right question. What is your take on actually going into a new place? You're usually, the production designer is one of the first people that travels to that place. Maybe a local PM or somebody of that nature, and you've got to set it all up.
That's right.
What is your driving force behind what your setup's going to be? How do you see that?
Well, in the case of Five Bloods, what you just described is absolutely correct. I was one of the first people to hit the ground, and the line producer Jonathan Philly was there, and also the Thai counterparts were there. The Thai producers were there, and there was a local locations person who was there, and they were not very good.
Okay.
So as a result of that, it became a much more complex problem.
Right.
I mean, their method of location scouting is to take you to a place. And meanwhile, the problem with these places were jungles, to take you to a place, to drop you off out of the car, and then you have to start to walk. So, and that's it. So it became a very extended scout process. And what I did is that I had a bunch of research with me, because again, I came up with my visual research, and I would say, I need this kind of forest, I need this kind of jungle. And that helped guide them to where they were going to take me, to whatever national parks they were going to take me. But really what happens is I think that was really one of the few deficiencies with the Thai crews. It's a completely different approach to location scouting. But I did bring with me my American art director, and I actually brought over an American production office coordinator. We brought on a set decorator and her lead person. And then we had the Thai counterparts for all those positions. The Thai crews were extraordinary. Fortunately, the construction coordinator spoke English very well. And they had an amazing group of, in Thailand, you have the most amazing temples and palaces. And I know that in my heart, I was working with all the people who were descendants of the people who had carved those places. Right. Because the sculpting work on the ruins was extraordinary. So I was very lucky. I felt very blessed to be working with a group of amazing artists. And although no one spoke English, you would do this, and that's how you would thank them, No.
Can we talk a little bit about those ruins? Because that temple at the end of the film is magnificent. The sculpture within it, just extraordinary. Can you sort of, and one of the questions I think Hans is prompting me to get to some of the audience questions. I have been a little bit. One of the questions is, in terms of sort of how you decided on the location, where you built it, and how did you mitigate sort of your footprint? Did you, in an ecological sense, did you come out of there sort of leaving it the way it was, I suppose is the question. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, you know, the temple in the film is based on something in central Vietnam called the My Son ruins. And they are a World Heritage Site. And it's complicated trying to get permits to shoot in Vietnam. So clearly we did not, we always knew that we were going to have to build the temple.
Right.
So we did our research. We sent my art department team down there to take photographs, to take pictures. I went there to take a look. It was utterly fantastic. But then, you know, at some point or another, I'm inspired by all this, but then at some point or another, I have to sit down and I have to design it. Mm-hmm. Now, from a budgetary point of view, it could have been very complicated because initially the talk was building the entire ruins from scratch. Right. Okay, every single structure. Mm-hmm. And I instinctively knew that that was going to take too long. Okay, so ironically, again, as I'm driving around Thailand, Chiang Mai, scouting locations, I kept seeing these rectangular blocks in neighborhoods. And they were tall rectangular blocks, made out of brick. And it turns out that people were used to use these things to dry tobacco leaves, okay? So idea goes off in my head. And I said to my locations department, find me some areas where these things are. Because I knew that if I could use these to build part of the ruins, then I would only have to build the 3 or 4 buildings that were the big pieces that were important for the film. So that's what the locations department started to do. And it turns out that they found a lot, a football-sized lot, filled, it looked like it was in the middle of the jungle, okay? Turns out that it was off of a commercial street in a suburban neighborhood in Chiang Mai. So literally outside our ruins was this big commercial street with all these stores. But when you walked into the lot behind it, you thought that you were deep in the jungle. And it had maybe 4 or 5 or 6 of these units that I was interested in. And so I came in there and I devised a plan and I designed my set to fit into that space. And the primary structures that you see in the film, we built all of that stuff from scratch.
Right.
So, so it was a combination of and then I completely re-altered these brick structures to make them look like the ruins. But again, it was the magic of movie making. And the thing that was good from a production point of view is that there was a place to park the trucks. There was a place to park the crew. You know what I mean? So people, literally you're walking off the suburban street and you walk and you look like you're deep in the jungle. It's crazy.
Amazing.
Movie magic.
I've got to ask a couple more audience questions. I received this email earlier today. One of the things that people want to know is basically about you and sort of what fundamentally sort of made you into a production designer, and what do you still do to kind of be that person? You partially answered that question already, but it's specific in terms of what your hobbies are. What do you do? What does Wynn Thomas do when he's not working, I guess is the question.
I read.
Nice.
I mean, I'm a real art geek, you know, I'm still a theater geek. So, you know, everything I said, that's how I feed my soul.
Right.
So I live in New York City, and unlike a lot of people who go to the theater once or twice a year, I literally go to the theater I'm sometimes in the theater 2 or 3 times a week. It's either a play or a musical, or I'm at a dance event, or I'm at the opera, okay? And then I read usually 3 or 4 books at a time, you know, and a wide variety of subject matter. I have a thing about Ralph Ellison that I'm reading right now, his letters. I'm reading something called The Hajj by Leo Uris, who wrote Exodus. I'm reading something by Sebastian Barry, who is a British writer. You know, so I read, and then I go to movies all the time because I love movies, and then I go to museums. So I mean, I'm literally, that's, you know, that's what I do. That's what, you know.
It sounds like an ideal life. I want to move on a little bit because we're an hour and 23 minutes into our conversation.
Oh my gosh, I had no idea.
Really fast, and we're going to get cut off in about, you know, the next 10, 15 minutes. And our audience nicely has stuck with us, so thank you very much, everybody. I want to talk about kind of diversity and inclusion. It's a big topic these days. The Production Designers Collective, I just wrote a little article for them recently about it, and I want to get your take on it. Now, I want to do it from a couple of different perspectives. Spike Lee built a gang of people that he wanted to work with, and I think almost all of you are African American. Do you have such a gang of people group of people that you work with consistently? Is that something that you've ever tried to kind of pull together, or is that just impossible as a production designer?
Well, you know, on a very personal level, this has become the issue, but for me, it has not so much been an issue, but it's been a practice.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you want to make change, then it's up to the individual to make change. When I put my art department together, I will look at it and I will say, there's not enough women here and there's not enough people of color. Mm-hmm. And I will go out and I will get them. Okay. Because that's the only way you make any change. Right. You're going to hear all this stuff now, mm-hmm. all these points of view on it. But ultimately, in the end, this is about hiring people and training them. Right. So that they can go off. So that, you know, I work with a lot of young artists, and, you know, of a variety of hues, because again, my thing is that it should be about inclusion, not diversity, but inclusion. Right. And my goal as a person, my personal goal is to train, right, and then recommend those people to other designers. They get a different kind of experience, so that they have a flexibility of working on a wide variety of projects. Right. So it's intentional. Yeah,
I think it has to be kind of an intentional driven thing in a certain way, because at a certain point, passively hasn't worked. It hasn't worked for 40 years. It hasn't worked for 400 years, whatever you want to do it. So it does have to be driven. And I think at a certain point, I just want to relay a quick story that you and I talked about earlier. Is basically that now, at a certain point, I want to get your take on it, because this is really interesting. You're a Black production designer, and then you are not a Black production designer because you've done everything that's not a Black movie. You've done, you know, Mars Attacks, The Grudge, not The Grudge, that was a slow movie.
Yeah, Grudge Match, Get Smart, all kinds of things.
Get Smart, Beautiful Mind, not a Black production designer, quote unquote. We need a Black guy to do this movie. But now we're at a point where you're a Black production designer again, because that's who people are seeking out. And how does that make you feel in a certain way?
Well, frankly, it enrages me, really. I think in a perfect world, we come to this business because we want to tell stories, right? So in a perfect, you know, again, I want to do Moliere, I want to do Shakespeare. That's what I want to do. The business has a tendency to look at an individual, and this happens with a lot of people, to look at them and to put them in a box and to label that box. So I have worked, and I think the results of that, I have worked very hard not to be labeled, okay? But it's an ongoing fight, and it's a fight that I have all the time. I constantly say to my agent, where is my James Bond movie? because that's what I should be doing, you know? But because the nature, so especially, so what's happening now is unfortunately, a lot of people will get an opportunity now. And my hope is that they will get the experience that they need, and that experience will lead to a long and fruitful career.
Right.
But at the same time, I think we all have to resist being put into the box.
Yeah, because the pendulum swings in a really negative way that way.
That's correct.
Because for years, you're Wynn Thomas. And then for now, it's like, Wynn Thomas, let's get that guy because he's darker than the other guy. Yeah.
Someone just called me up the other day and said, oh, I got a call from Ryan Murphy's office and they're looking for Black production designers. And when I mentioned you to them, they hadn't heard from you about you. And I said, what, how can that be? How come, you know what I mean? But that's how outrageous it is, because the town is in its own bubble and they don't look outside their bubble. Right. This political situation we're in right now is forcing people to look outside their bubble. But in the doing of that, they're putting people back in a box.
Yeah. So let's burst the goddamn bubble, basically. Yeah,
that's exactly right.
Well, I think we should end on that note. I can think of no better way to end this than with those great words. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been amazing.
Oh, wow. Thank you. For me, it went fast. I hope it wasn't boring for anyone else.
An hour and a half in no time.
Yes. Thank you so much. It's so great to spend this time with you and with everyone that I can't see. Thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Yes, thank you, Wynn. I mean, absolutely amazing. It was inspiring and generous, candid, such an important conversation, an incredible insight from, I mean, you're a piece of, I don't mean to make you sound old, but you're a piece of cinematic history. You really are, and truly inspiring to all of us. So thank you so much. Absolutely fantastic. And our, this being our last official designer masterclass of the series. We'll do more, no doubt, but this is the last one of the series. Thank you so much for being so brilliant throughout this entire series.
All right.
It's been an absolute pleasure. These interviews with production designers from all over have been absolutely inspiring. So thank you. Please, to the audience, join us tomorrow night. Not usually we have a Thursday night, but scheduling pushed us to Wednesday night. So tomorrow night, we've got Corinne Kasama, the amazing, groundbreaking director of Girl Fight and Destroyer, moderated by award-winning DGC director Deborah Chow. It continues to be an incredible series. I really hope it's providing some relief, some entertainment, and no doubt, as always, incredible inspiration. So Arv, Wynn, thanks again so much.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you soon. Bye-bye.